In November evening in 2017, the Beverly Hills Hotel shimmered under golden chandeliers, the marble floors reflecting polished footsteps. A few guests moved past, chatting softly. Some glanced curiously, others unaware of the tension brewing. Dr. Margaret Caldwell, a renowned psychologist, strode across the lobby, notebook in hand, pulse racing. Years of headlines and stories about Ozzy Osbourne had built one thought: this man is a danger to youth. Tonight, she would confront him. Her eyes found him immediately. Ozzy leaned casually against a marble column, sunglasses shielding his eyes, cigarette dangling lazily, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. Calm, almost serene. Nothing like the monster she had imagined. Dr. Caldwell gripped her notebook tightly. Words ran through her mind. You are a monster. You've glorified chaos. You've ruined lives. Yet even as she approached, she noticed a quiet presence, a calmness that made her pause. Could the man she expected to confront really be like this? The lobby seemed to shrink around them. A few guests passed by naturally, their movement adding realism, but they didn't distract from the unfolding moment. Light from the chandeliers fractured across the polished marble floors, creating tiny dancing prisms, framing the encounter. She stepped closer, heels clicking, pulse quickening. Every detail: the smoke curling from Ozzy's cigarette, the reflection of light, the subtle movement of people in the background felt magnified. She realized this confrontation might not go as she imagined. The man before her seemed human, thoughtful, and grounded. Finally, she opened her mouth. The tension thickened. The lobby seemed to hold its breath with her. Dr. Caldwell stopped a few feet from Ozzy, notebook clutched tightly in her hands. She could feel her pulse pounding in her ears. Mr. Osbourne, she began, her voice steady but sharp. You've glorified addiction and chaos for decades. Don't you think it's time someone held you accountable? Ozzy tilted his head slightly, the faint smirk never leaving his lips. He exhaled a thin stream of cigarette smoke and said softly, almost conversationally, I've never told anyone to follow me blindly. I just live my life. People choose their paths. Dr. Caldwell's eyebrows knit together. She opened her notebook, flipping to a page filled with stories of teenagers influenced by his music. But even as she read, she couldn't ignore the calm intelligence in his voice, the quiet honesty in his posture. The lobby seemed to blur around them. Guests passed naturally in the background, a couple laughing softly. Near the elevators, a hotel staff member wheeling a luggage cart, adding life to the space without distracting from the confrontation. You're saying you don't take responsibility? She pressed. Ozzy shook his head slowly. Responsibility? I can only control my actions, not what everyone else does. I've made mistakes, plenty of them, but I've also survived. Maybe that teaches more than just rebellion. Dr. Caldwell froze for a heartbeat, realizing that for the first time, the man she had demonized seemed human, not the monster the headlines made him out to be. She lowered her notebook slightly, unsure how to continue. The lobby lights reflected across the marble floors, shadows stretching between them. The tension hung heavy in the air. But now, instead of anger, curiosity crept into her mind. What was this man really teaching the youth? Survival, resilience, or something deeper? Ozzy took a final drag from his cigarette and flicked it into the ashtray. He looked at her directly, eyes sharp yet calm. Sometimes people learn from my mistakes more than my music, he said quietly. Dr. Caldwell's voice softened. I never thought about it that way. A few guests moved by, carrying their own lives, unaware they were witnessing a quiet turning point. The confrontation had begun, but the story had shifted from judgment to understanding, from anger to reflection. The lobby felt still now, the initial tension settling into a quiet, heavy pause. Dr. Caldwell stared at Ozzy, notebook lowered. She had expected anger, defensiveness, maybe even ridicule, but instead there was a strange calm, a sense of clarity in the way he carried himself. You know, Ozzy said, exhaling a thin stream of smoke, life throws people into chaos. Sometimes the only thing you can do is survive it and learn. That's what I try to show, not the chaos itself, but that people can survive it. Dr. Caldwell hesitated. For years, she had studied addiction and influence, always assuming he was a dangerous example. But now, standing so close, she saw something else. The resilience, the lessons hidden in the mistakes, the human struggle behind the headlines. A couple of hotel guests passed by near the elevators, laughing softly, a child tugging at a parent's hand. Their presence reminded her this was still a real space, not a stage, grounding the moment. She noticed how Ozzy's gaze wasn't judgmental, it was reflective, almost empathetic. So, you were saying people learn from watching your life, not just your music? She asked. Ozzy nodded slowly. Exactly. I've made plenty of mistakes. Terrible ones. But if someone can see that and think, I don't want to go there, then maybe I've done something right. Dr. Caldwell's stern expression softened. She felt a mixture of surprise and humility. She realized that judging someone from headlines alone was shallow. This man, notorious and wild in the public eye, was also teaching lessons about resilience, survival, and honesty. The lobby lights shimmered across the marble floor, reflecting the subtle movement of the few guests around them. Shadows stretched, dancing with the light as if the universe itself was punctuating the moment. She closed her notebook gently. I think I understand, she said quietly. Ozzy offered a faint smile. That's all anyone can ask for. The encounter, brief but profound, ended not in confrontation, but in understanding. A few guests passed by obliviously, carrying their lives forward, unaware they had witnessed a quiet turning point between two very different people. A soft creak of the lobby doors announced someone new. A young woman stepped in, carrying a small suitcase, her eyes wide as she took in the grand space. She moved past a few guests who barely noticed her, but her presence seemed to shift the energy in the room. Ozzy glanced toward her, then back at Dr. Caldwell, raising an eyebrow slightly. The psychologist felt her heart skip. Who was this? Why did it feel like she had arrived at the perfect moment? Ozzy's calm demeanor remained, but there was a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. Sometimes, he said softly, the right person shows up at the right time. Makes everything clearer. The young woman stopped near the elevators, adjusting her suitcase handle, glancing around nervously. A hotel staff member passed by, greeting her with a polite nod. Guests continued their movement naturally in the background, some pausing briefly to glance at the new arrival, then moving on. Dr. Caldwell realized something profound. The story she had planned the lecture, the confrontation, was no longer just about judgment. It was now about connection. Seeing the young woman's nervous glance, Ozzy's reflective demeanor, and the subtle interactions of the few guests made her understand how influence can work in unexpected ways. Ozzy took a slow step forward and gestured gently toward the woman. Life teaches lessons in small ways. Sometimes just showing up for someone, being there, that's enough. Dr. Caldwell's notebook stayed closed. Words were unnecessary. The lobby seemed to breathe with the movement of the few guests, the light glinting of the marble, the distant murmur of conversation. She understood that influence wasn't always loud or visible. Sometimes it was subtle, quiet, and transformative. The young woman, oblivious to the significance of the moment, moved on, disappearing toward the hotel elevators. And in that brief instant, both Dr. Caldwell and Ozzy had witnessed a lesson neither expected, one about presence, observation, and the power of subtle influence. The young woman's footsteps faded toward the elevators, leaving the lobby quieter than before. Dr. Caldwell and Ozzy stood in a delicate silence, each processing the unexpected moment. What had started as confrontation had shifted subtly into reflection. Dr. Caldwell finally spoke, her voice softer now. I've spent so long assuming your influence was harmful. I thought it was reckless, destructive, but maybe I've been looking at it all wrong. Ozzy tilted his head, cigarette in hand. It's easy to judge from a distance. Headlines, stories, images. They never show the whole picture. People see what they want, or what they expect. But life is messy, and people can learn from it if they're paying attention. A bell chimed softly from the lobby doors as a few late guests entered, carrying shopping bags or luggage. Their presence felt natural, grounding the moment. One young man glanced curiously at the two figures near the marble column, but quickly moved on. Dr. Caldwell exhaled slowly, realizing the lesson wasn't about blame. It was about perspective, survival, and the subtle guidance that came from seeing someone face their mistakes and continue forward. Ozzy's eyes softened. I've made mistakes, terrible ones, but the way people respond, the way they take something from it, that's what really matters. For the first time that evening, Dr. Caldwell smiled faintly. The anger, the preconceptions, the assumptions she had carried melted slightly under the weight of understanding. Influence wasn't always loud or destructive. Sometimes it was quiet, hidden in resilience, honesty, and survival. The lobby lights reflected across the polished floors, shadows stretching and shifting as a few guests passed by, oblivious. The atmosphere was still, almost reverent, but alive with subtle motion. The confrontation had transformed into a turning point, a moment of realization neither she nor Ozzy would forget. The lobby had quieted further. Only a few guests wandered past, some checking their phones, some chatting quietly near the elevators. Dr. Caldwell and Ozzy stood almost in silence, the tension now replaced by contemplation. I never realized, Dr. Caldwell said slowly. That people could learn from your struggles as much as from your music. I assumed your life was just chaos. Ozzy exhaled softly, flicking ash from his cigarette into a small tray. Chaos is part of life, but survival, honesty, reflection, that's the part that matters. You don't always see it, but people notice. They see mistakes, and they see how you face them. That teaches something more than just the headlines ever could. Dr. Caldwell looked around the lobby. A family walked past, the parents talking quietly, a small child tugging at a suitcase. Their presence reminded her that life was moving on outside their little bubble, and yet these lessons were quietly unfolding in plain sight. You mean influence isn't always direct? She whispered. Ozzy nodded. Exactly. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's quiet. People watch, they listen, they learn, without even realizing it. The chandelier shimmered overhead, light reflecting across the marble floors. A bell chimed as another guest entered. Footsteps soft on the polished surface. Shadows danced gently, blending with the reflections, creating a serene, almost sacred feeling in the space. Dr. Caldwell closed her notebook completely now, feeling the weight of understanding settle in. The confrontation had shifted entirely. It wasn't about judgment anymore, it was about observation, reflection, and the unexpected lessons hidden in human lives. Ozzy smiled faintly, a rare softness in his eyes. Sometimes the quietest moments teach the loudest lessons. The lobby returned to its usual rhythm, but for Dr. Caldwell, the evening had already left an indelible mark, a quiet revelation she would carry with her forever. The lobby's soft lighting bathed the marble floors in a warm glow. Guests moved through the space, naturally a couple chatting near the elevators, a concierge guiding a visitor, a man adjusting his tie while walking past, but their presence only highlighted the quiet intensity between Dr. Caldwell and Ozzy. You know, Ozzy said, voice calm, people often see me as this wild, reckless figure, but they don't see the human side, the mistakes, the regrets, the nights spent just trying to keep going. Dr. Caldwell listened intently, realizing that for the first time she was seeing the man behind the headlines, the one who had survived addiction, loss, and public scrutiny, and yet still carried a sense of humor, resilience, and honesty. She glanced at him closely. I always thought your life was destructive. That's what the media showed. But now I see it differently. It's messy, yes, but it's real. People can learn from that. As his faint smirk softened into a thoughtful expression. Exactly. Real life isn't clean. It isn't perfect. But there's a lesson in every mistake, if people pay attention. A few guests passed by quietly, some glancing curiously, but most focused on their own business. The subtle background movement reminded them both that life continued full of stories, lessons, and moments that often went unnoticed. Dr. Caldwell exhaled. The anger, the assumption she had carried, had melted. In their place was understanding, empathy, and a new perspective on influence. It wasn't always about loud words or dramatic actions. Sometimes it was the human side of survival, the small, quiet things that left a mark. Ozzy flicked the last traces of his cigarette into the tray, eyes meeting hers. You don't have to understand everything, he said softly. Sometimes just seeing someone survive, that's enough. The lobby returned to its normal rhythm. Guests moved naturally. Shadows stretched across the marble floor, and both Dr. Caldwell and Ozzy stood quietly, aware that an important, subtle lesson had been shared, one that went far beyond what either had expected when they first crossed paths. The lobby had settled into its quiet rhythm. Only a few guests drifted past, a couple heading to the elevators, a man checking his watch, a concierge guiding someone toward the doors. The space felt alive but unobtrusive, a perfect backdrop for the moment unfolding between Dr. Caldwell and Ozzy. Dr. Caldwell took a deep breath. I came here ready to accuse, to confront, but I leave understanding more than I expected. It's strange, but I see the lessons now. Ozzy smiled faintly, cigarette in hand. It's not always easy to see the lessons at first. Sometimes people only notice when they step back, watch carefully, and reflect. Life teaches quietly if you let it. She looked around, noticing the soft movement of guests and the shimmer of chandeliers reflected on the polished marble floor. It struck her how subtle influence could be. The lessons one leaves behind weren't always loud or obvious. They were quiet, often hidden in mistakes, resilience, and survival. Ozzy exhaled, flicking the last traces of ash into the tray. People always expect drama, chaos, but most of the real lessons happen in moments no one notices. Dr. Caldwell closed her notebook for the final time. She felt a calm she hadn't anticipated. The anger she had carried all these years had been replaced with reflection, and a newfound appreciation for the human side of someone. she had only known through headlines. A final group of guests passed by, oblivious to the small, profound interaction taking place. The lobby returned to normal. Yet for Dr. Caldwell and Ozzy, the evening had changed them both. Ozzy adjusted his jacket and took a last look around the lobby. "Remember," he said quietly, "sometimes surviving, learning, and being honest with yourself teaches more than words ever could." Dr. Caldwell nodded, a faint smile on her face. The confrontation had ended, but the lesson lingered quiet, subtle, and powerful. She turned to leave, her perspective forever altered by the unexpected encounter with the Prince of Darkness.